A stroke doesn't always happen without warning. In many cases, the body starts sending signals long before the real damage begins. A strange feeling in the arm, sudden dizziness, words becoming harder to say, blurred vision that lasts only seconds, tiny symptoms, the kind most people ignore. And that's exactly what makes strokes so dangerous, because by the time many people realize something is wrong, it's already too late. Tonight, you're going to see what a stroke can actually look like the day before it happens, the early warning signs doctors say people miss most often, and why recognizing these symptoms early could save your life, or someone you love. And later in this video, you'll hear about the symptom many stroke survivors ignored right before everything changed forever. Imagine this. It's a normal morning. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. You wake up tired but not concerned. You walk into the kitchen. You pour coffee. You check your phone. Then suddenly, your hand feels strange, weak, numb, heavy. Maybe only for a few seconds. Then it disappears. So you ignore it. You continue your day. Hours later, during a conversation, you suddenly struggle to find the right words. Your sentence comes out wrong. For a moment, you feel confused. Then again, it disappears. You tell yourself it's stress, lack of sleep, maybe anxiety. But what you don't realize is, your brain may already be in danger. Most people believe strokes happen instantly. Out of nowhere. One moment you're fine. The next moment your life changes forever. But doctors say that's not always true. Because before many major strokes, the body quietly sends warnings first. And one of the scariest parts is how ordinary those symptoms can feel. That's why people miss them. Because the body doesn't always scream for help. Sometimes it whispers. And those whispers can become life-changing if ignored. A stroke happens when blood flow to part of the brain becomes blocked, or when a blood vessel inside the brain bursts. Without oxygen, brain cells begin dying within minutes. That's why strokes are medical emergencies, because every second matters. But before some major strokes, people experience something called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, often called a mini-stroke. And this is where things become incredibly dangerous. Because TIA symptoms often disappear quickly, the numbness fades, speech returns to normal, vision clears up. And because the symptoms disappear, people assume they're okay. But doctors say a TIA can be one of the strongest warnings the body gives before a major stroke happens. In other words, the body may already be telling you something is wrong. And one of the most common warning signs is sudden numbness, especially on one side of the body. A person may suddenly feel weakness in one arm, one leg, or one side of the face. Some people describe it as pins and needles. Others say their arm suddenly felt dead, not painful, just strange. And because it doesn't feel dramatic, they ignore it. But sudden numbness is never something to take lightly, especially when it appears without explanation. Another warning sign is sudden confusion. And this symptom can feel terrifying. A person may suddenly struggle to form sentences. Simple words become difficult. They know what they want to say, but the brain can't process language correctly. Sometimes speech becomes slurred. Other times, the person may sound perfectly normal to themselves, while everyone else notices something is wrong. And because the symptom sometimes disappears quickly, many people brush it off. But temporary symptoms can still signal serious danger. Vision problems are another warning sign many people never expect. Some stroke survivors describe sudden blurry vision. Others say they temporarily lost sight in one eye. A few described it as feeling like a curtain suddenly covered part of their vision. And because the symptom may only last seconds, people often ignore it completely. But the brain controls vision too. And if blood flow becomes disrupted, vision can change instantly. This next symptom is one doctors say people dismiss constantly: dizziness. Not normal dizziness from standing too quickly, but sudden balance problems. Suddenly feeling unstable while walking. Feeling like the room is spinning. Some people stumble for no reason. Others feel disconnected from their surroundings. And because dizziness can happen for many harmless reasons, people rarely imagine it could be connected to the brain. But sometimes, the brain is already struggling, and the body is trying desperately to warn you. Now here's where things become frightening. Many stroke survivors later realized their symptoms had appeared hours earlier, sometimes even the day before. But because the symptoms disappeared, they convinced themselves everything was fine, until the real stroke happened, and what happened next changed their lives forever. One survivor later said, "I thought I was just tired. I never imagined my brain was already in trouble. Another person described temporarily losing control of their hand while texting. Minutes later, everything returned to normal. The next morning, they suffered a major stroke. That's what makes these symptoms so dangerous. They can seem small, forgettable, easy to explain away, but sometimes they're the only warning the body gives. And later in this video, you'll hear about the symptom doctors say is ignored more than any other, even though it can be one of the clearest warning signs before a stroke. One of the biggest reasons strokes become deadly is because the early symptoms often don't feel serious enough. People expect extreme pain, collapse, instant paralysis, but many strokes begin much more quietly. A strange feeling, a brief moment of confusion, a symptom that disappears before anyone becomes concerned. And that false sense of safety becomes dangerous, because when symptoms disappear, people assume the threat is gone. But doctors say temporary symptoms can actually be one of the biggest warning signs, especially when they involve the brain. One symptom many people ignore is facial drooping. Sometimes one side of the face suddenly feels heavy. A smile becomes uneven. An eyelid may droop slightly. But because it can happen subtly, people often don't notice it immediately. Friends and family sometimes notice it first. Others only realize something was wrong later when looking back. And the terrifying part is, even temporary facial weakness can signal interrupted blood flow to the brain. Another major warning sign is sudden weakness. Not normal tiredness, but sudden unexplained weakness in one side of the body. Some people suddenly struggle to lift objects. Others feel one leg becoming unstable while walking. One survivor described holding a cup of coffee, then suddenly dropping it without understanding why. At the time, they laughed it off. Hours later, they were in the hospital. Then there's sudden difficulty understanding language, and this symptom can feel deeply unsettling. A person may hear words clearly, but the brain struggles to process meaning. Conversations suddenly become confusing. Simple instructions feel overwhelming. And because the person often appears physically normal, others may not realize what's happening. But inside the brain, something serious may already be unfolding. Headaches can also become warning signs, especially sudden severe headaches that feel completely different from normal headaches. Some stroke survivors describe explosive pain. Others describe intense pressure behind the eyes. And many later said the headache felt unusual. But they ignored it because they assumed it was stress or exhaustion. But when the brain loses normal blood flow, pain can appear suddenly. And sometimes, that pain becomes a warning sign before a devastating stroke. Doctors also warn about sudden coordination problems. A person may suddenly struggle to walk straight. They may lose balance unexpectedly. Simple movements become harder. And because these symptoms may only last briefly, many people never seek medical help. That's what makes strokes so frightening. The body often gives only small windows of warning. And if those windows are ignored, the consequences can become permanent. One doctor explained it this way: the brain whispers before it screams. And that's exactly why awareness matters. Because many people who suffer major strokes later realize their body tried to warn them first, but they didn't recognize the signs until it was too late. A 52-year-old man woke up feeling normal. He went to work, answered emails, talked with co-workers. Then during lunch, his right hand suddenly became numb. It lasted less than a minute. He shook it off. Later that afternoon, he struggled to read a sentence on his computer screen. Again, the symptom disappeared quickly, so he ignored it. That night, he suffered a major stroke. Doctors later told him the earlier symptoms may have been warning signs his brain was already losing blood flow. Another woman described suddenly feeling dizzy while grocery shopping. She grabbed the cart for support. For a few seconds, she felt completely disoriented. Then everything returned to normal. She blamed dehydration. The next morning, she woke up unable to move one side of her body. Stories like these happen more often than people realize. And the frightening part is, many survivors later say the same thing. I didn't think it was serious. That sentence appears again and again because the human brain naturally wants to explain symptoms in harmless ways. Stress, fatigue, anxiety, poor sleep. But neurological symptoms should never be ignored, especially sudden ones. One stroke survivor later said, "If I had gone to the hospital earlier, my life might look completely different today." And that reality becomes heartbreaking, because fast treatment can dramatically improve outcomes after a stroke. But delayed treatment allows more brain cells to die. And once brain tissue is damaged, recovery becomes much harder. That's why doctors constantly repeat the same message. Don't wait, even if symptoms disappear, even if they seem minor, because sometimes those few minutes can change everything. One of the most dangerous myths about strokes is the belief that they only happen to elderly people. But strokes can happen much earlier than most people think. And certain risk factors dramatically increase the danger. High blood pressure is one of the biggest. Many people live with high blood pressure for years without symptoms. But over time, it damages blood vessels throughout the body, including inside the brain. Smoking also increases stroke risk significantly, because smoking damages blood vessels and reduces oxygen flow. Diabetes is another major risk factor, as well as obesity. Chronic stress, poor sleep, heavy alcohol use, lack of exercise, and in today's world, many people unknowingly live with multiple risk factors at once. Long work hours, constant stress, poor diets, little sleep. Over time, the body begins paying the price. And doctors say chronic stress itself may play a bigger role than many people realize. Because stress affects blood pressure, inflammation, heart health, sleep quality. Everything becomes connected. And that's why prevention matters so much. Not just reacting after symptoms happen, but reducing risk before the danger appears. Doctors use a simple system called FAST to recognize strokes quickly. And remembering it could one day save a life. F. Face drooping. Ask the person to smile. Does one side of the face droop? Arm weakness. Ask them to raise both arms. Does one arm drift downward? S. Speech difficulty. Is speech slurred, confused, difficult to understand? T. Time to call emergency services immediately, because when a stroke happens, time is brain. Every minute without treatment increases the risk of permanent damage. And here's something critical many people don't realize. Even if symptoms disappear, medical attention is still necessary, because temporary symptoms can signal a much larger stroke risk ahead. That's why doctors take TIAs extremely seriously. They are not harmless events. They can be urgent warnings, and recognizing them early can prevent catastrophe. Many people survive strokes, but recovery can be incredibly difficult. Some survivors lose movement permanently. Others struggle with speech for years. Some lose independence completely. Simple tasks suddenly become overwhelming. Walking, riding, driving, even speaking. Families often change overnight. A spouse becomes a caregiver. Children become responsible for parents. And emotionally, recovery can feel devastating. One survivor described feeling trapped inside their own body. Another said the hardest part wasn't physical pain. It was losing the ability to communicate normally. That's why prevention matters so deeply, because strokes don't only affect one moment. They can affect every moment after. And many survivors later say the same thing. I wish I had recognized the warning signs sooner. If there's one thing you remember from this video, let it be this. Never ignore sudden neurological symptoms. Not numbness, not confusion, not blurry vision, not dizziness, not facial weakness, even if the symptoms disappear, especially if they disappear. Because your body may be warning you before something far worse happens. And the terrifying truth is, many people never realize the warning signs until it's too late. But now, you know what to look for. And that knowledge could one day save a life. Maybe even your own. If this video helped you understand stroke warning signs, share it with someone you care about, because awareness matters. And sometimes, a single piece of information at the right moment can change someone's future forever.